Hi, students. So this is going to be chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby. And this week we are reading chapters 1, 2, and 3. So this is all you need to have read through Sunday, and you can work on your packet. Do a quick review of chapter 2 with my handy notes. And if I can find a crash course over chapter 2, I'll link that as well. Remember that chapter 2 is basically the first party of the book. So Tom and Nick ride into New York City. Nick has no intention of actually going to a party with Tom, but he went. They stop in what's called the Valley of Ashes, and like I said, I'll link a couple things to that to help you with that. We get to meet the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg, Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. They stop at Wilson's, which is like a combo gas station / car repair place. And they meet a man named George Wilson, who's kind of a young guy. He's called poor, but unsuspecting. And his wife, Myrtle, it turns out, is Tom's mistress. She is described as being plump, sensuous, but is clearly poor and uneducated. They go to New York City, where it turns out that Tom and Myrtle have a little love nest together, like a little apartment in Manhattan. On the way, they stop and buy a dog. They end up inviting Myrtle's sister Catherine over, as well as a couple downstairs, the McKees, and Nick says he gets very drunk. And time just goes on, and he says there's just, like, time is passing. He has no idea what's going on. There's people coming in and out. He has this conversation with Catherine, this really weird conversation with Catherine, where she asks him, do you know Gatsby? And he says this is like the second time he's heard somebody else mention Gatsby specifically. She says that she was at a party and she's heard rumors about him. And this is going to be kind of a recurring theme. It's like all these people have all these stories about Jay Gatsby, but nobody actually seems to know like anything that's been substantiated about him. Later on, Catherine tells Nick that the reason that Tom and Myrtle can't be together is because Tom's wife won't divorce him because she is Catholic. And Nick knows that Daisy is not Catholic, and he says he's kind of surprised by this lie. They have this conversation about why Myrtle married her husband George in the first place and why she's with someone like Tom, like dating someone like Tom. And it turns out that George Wilson was a very poor person, and when Myrtle married him, she had no idea the extent to which he was so poor. And it wasn't until after they were married that she found out that he didn't even have enough money to buy the suit that he wore to their wedding. He had to borrow it from somebody. And she says, I should have known better than to marry someone like him. So she says that her affair with Tom she sort of implies that a lot of it is tied to his wealth because she and her husband are now wealthy. Nick thinks it's interesting that there's like this implied story that Tom and Myrtle are going to run off together because he knows Tom not super well, but well enough to know that Tom would never like run off with somebody like Myrtle when he's got somebody like Daisy waiting at home. There's a fight around midnight. We hear Myrtle Wilson, she's yelling Daisy's name over and over again, and Tom is telling her to stop. And she's saying, I'll say it anytime I want. He smacks her. He hits her so hard in the face that he breaks her nose, which shows us, like, the kind of person he is. Nick is so inebriated at that point that he has like no idea what's going on. He says he's super confused. People are like mopping blood off the floor. He ends up leaving and going down in an elevator with a couple who live downstairs, the McKees. And Mr. McKee is a photographer, and he tries to like show Nick some of his photographs, but at the same time he's like changing into his pajamas and getting into bed, and Nick is super confused. And he says the next thing he remembers, he is sleeping on a train bench, waiting for a train to take him back to West Egg. So definitely an interesting night. Chapter 3 is going to be Jay Gatsby's first party, and this is going to be the first time Nick actually meets Jay Gatsby, this Jay Gatsby that everyone is talking about. And based on what he's heard of Jay Gatsby, Nick has kind of like all these assumptions about what Jay Gatsby is going to be like. And so when he finally does meet Gatsby, he's surprised. And so he describes this party and just like how over the top it is. And like I said in the video I posted earlier today, if you have a chance to watch any versions of The Great Gatsby, you'll see that the party scenes are just exorbitant, like very over the top. We're talking about the Roaring Twenties. We've learned about these things through like that F. Scott Fitzgerald video that I had you watch, like just a time of extravagance. And if you've done that activity that's in the chapters 1, 2, and 3 packet that has to do with the Fitzgerald's lifestyle and the lifestyle they lived and how much money they were spending on their lifestyle, like they end up living paycheck to paycheck because they were rich, but they were spending their money on just like ridiculous amounts of things and these parties and entertainment and just so over the top. So I am on chapter 3. And he's talking about Jay Gatsby here. There was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guests diving from the tower of his raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach while his 2 motorboats slit the waters of the Sound, drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all trains. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including a extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived from a fruiterer in New York. Every Monday, these same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of pulpless halves. There was a machine in the kitchen which could extract the juice of 200 oranges in half an hour if a little button was pressed 200 times by a butler's thumb. At least once a fortnight, a corps of caterers came down with several hundred feet of canvas and enough colored lights to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby's enormous garden. On buffet tables garnished with glistening hors d'oeuvre, spice-baked hams crowded against salads of harlequin designs, and pastry pigs and turkeys bewitched to a dark gold. In the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up and stocked with gins and liquors, and with cordials so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another, which of course is interesting because it's prohibition, but really, with enough money, get what you want. By 7 o'clock, the orchestra has arrived. No thin five-piece affair, but a whole pit full of oboes and trombones and saxophones and viols and cornets and piccolos and low and high drums. The last swimmers have come in from the beach now and are dressing upstairs. The cars from New York are parked 5 deep in the drive, and already the halls and salons and verandas are gaudy with primary colors and hair shorn in strange new ways, and shawls beyond the dreams of Castile. The bar is in full swing, and floating rounds of cocktails permeate the garden outside until the air is alive with chatter and laughter and casual innuendo, and introductions forgotten on the spot, and enthusiastic meetings between women who never knew each other's names. The lights grow brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun, and now the orchestra is playing yellow cocktail music, and the opera of voices pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier, minute by minute, spilled with prodigality, tipped out at a cheerful word. The groups change more swiftly, swell with new arrivals, dissolve and form in the same breath. Already there are wanderers, confident girls who weave here and there among the stouter and more stable, become for a sharp, joyous moment the center of a group, and then excited with triumph glide on through the sea change of faces and voices and color under the constantly changing light. Suddenly, one of these gypsies in trembling opals seizes a cocktail out of the air, dumps it down for courage, and moving her hands like Frisco, dances out alone on the canvas platform. A momentary hush. The orchestra leader varies his rhythm obligingly for her, and there is a burst of chatter as the erroneous news goes around that she is Gilda Gray's understudy from the Follies. The party has begun. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. They got into automobiles, which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. Once they were introduced by somebody who knew Gatsby, and after that they conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with amusement parks. Nick is kind of making a joke there, right? Like basically there are no rules. Sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all, came for the party with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission. I had actually been invited. A chauffeur in a uniform of robin's egg blue crossed my lawn early that Saturday morning with a surprisingly formal note from his employer. The honor would be entirely Gatsby's, it said, if I would attend his little party that night. He had seen me several times and had intended to call on me long before, but a peculiar combination of circumstances had prevented it. Signed, J. Gatsby, in a majestic hand. Dressed up in white flannels, I went over to his lawn a little after 7 and wandered around rather ill at ease among swirls and eddies of people I didn't know, though here and there was a face I had noticed on the commuting train. I was immediately struck by the number of young Englishmen dotted about, all well-dressed, all looking a little hungry, and all talking in low, earnest voices to solid and prosperous Americans. I was sure they were all selling something, bonds or insurance or automobiles. They were, at least, agonizingly aware of the easy money in the vicinity, and convinced that it was theirs for a few words and the right key. As soon as I arrived, I made an attempt to find my host, that would be J. Gatsby. But the 2 or 3 people of whom I asked his whereabouts stared at me in such an amazed way and denied so vehemently